we want to talk about really enabling people and how to optimize during this time of crisis and challenge. And one of the things that we did say is that there's a ton of companies and practitioners and thought leaders that's talking about this topic, and all of that information is relative. And so we really wanted to create this intimate kind of forum where we could spend some time together and really provide some context and some information, but also as a way for you to have the intimacy of asking your questions and getting what you need. And so one of the things that you'll see, we have not made this very content heavy because we want to just bring the noise down just a little bit. There's a lot in the market today that can really be overwhelming. I think every day our teams are looking at different webinars, we're reading different information, different regulations, and so we want to bring the noise down. So this is really a session designed for you, and there are times to be really interactive. You can put your questions in chat, you can come off mute, you can raise your hand. We really want this to be an intimate discussion where we can provide either the insights, give you the questions or the aha that you should be thinking about so that you can be actioning and starting to make decisions with your business leaders, with your teams, or whatever role that you play in the organization. So housekeeping, we ask that you be on mute, but feel free to come off anytime to ask a question. If you'll please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your company, your role, and if you want the recording, if you'll just drop your email in there. We have been very sensitive while we invite people to not clutter their inboxes with unnecessary information if they don't want it. So if you put your email in there, we will send you out the material. So I'm Tiki Favorath. I'm the Senior Partner and Managing Director in HR & Co. And we're end-to-end human resources consulting and advisory firm in the commercial space as well as the public space. And there's really three things that we do. We either help leaders think about their people strategy. We either come in as staff augmentation to help them deliver on that strategy, or we come in on a strategic project to actually put the project together and help organizations implement it. And that's all thing people. So we're really excited. We enjoy people chaos, 20-year practitioner. And so this is our lane, this is our space, and we want to help HR show up as their best and give them everything that we've seen in every industry vertical across our 30 years of expertise and experience. So that's who we are, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-host who's going to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, it's Allison Nail-Malone, and my company's name is Malone Consultants Group, where we think, be, and do leadership differently. We work with leaders on one-on-one basis, in group settings, and within organizations to really think about how to do leadership differently, show up differently, not just during crisis time, but to really be thinking about how can we elevate our leadership presence, the way that we communicate, and our mindset when we come to decision making and showing up in our communities as well. So get your phones out or get another browser or web page up, because we're going to do our first poll. So today we're going to be centering our conversation around remote workforce. Should it stay? Should it go? And we're going to talk about the mindset around that and the practices and best practices and strategies around that. So I'm curious to find out, when you think about, from whatever role that you're in at the senior leadership, C-suite, director or so, like, are you ready? Are you prepared to advise or make a decision if your employees should stay or return, should stay like at home or return back to work? So are you guys ready? Yes or no? So you will want to bring up a text message and text that to 22333. And in the response section, you'll put Allison N677 and then A for yes, B for no. And then if you just pull up the website, you can also just choose A or B. You don't have to download anything. So let's see, we've got one I've already responded is yes, we think we're ready. No, not yet. And so our conversation today is really going to be centered around you as a leader within your organization, regardless of what role. how you can kind of impact and get your team ready, your department ready, help with your organization to get ready for this, because ultimately it's going to be happening. And so how do we get ourselves prepared mindset-wise and strategically? So we've got, I'm going to go ahead and lock the responses here. We've got about a 60-40 split here. So looks like majority of people are not quite ready yet. So Tiki, I'm going to have you do our next slide, our next poll. So don't put your phones away.
Okay. So one of the things about getting ready, and we know as leaders, we have to face our own reality. And so to help us guide our discussion and make sure that we're pulling forward the most relevant content that we've seen out there in the market, tell us a little bit about why you are ready or not ready. And so there's no right or wrong answer. I think you can pick multiple, but tell us what's really driving. We have a point of view, but it has not been validated. I like that. Okay. Who else? What else we have? That way we can help you, give you some insight. Okay, we have a plan but haven't discussed it. Okay, that's good. Both of those are great. Okay, 2. We have taken a temperature of where people are but not confident in the results. Okay, we have no idea what to do yet. Okay, great. Let's give it 2 more moments because this is going to be really important in advising and consulting. So that's 4 people, and so let's see if there's any more responses. Just to let you know, on your phone, if you text 22333, and once that you text that, in the body put Allison in 677, it's going to say you've joined the poll, and then you can type A, B, C, or D, and it'll record your response. So this is the first time you're using this technology. I want to give you a few moments to do that. Also, if you're not 100% confident, if you want to put your answer in the chat, we can then convert it over to the poll just so we have good insights.
All right, we'll go ahead and end it. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful for us to get a visual on where people are at. And it also helps us to know what kinds of resources that we can provide, those of you that are on this call and those of you who have participated in the past, but also find that you are great, not case study, but just, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyways, you represent the rest of the groups that I can't think of the word, coffee is not set in today. So why don't we go ahead and step into the content of why we're here today. And Tiki and I are going to share some information with you. Again, it'll be very short and concise, and then have an opportunity to have some discussion and questions around the leadership mindset, and then also the process behind how we get ready. So this past week brought increased national discussion of return to normalcy, and the first details have started to emerge as to what that might look like. However, a deeper dive into the plans being presented by our federal, state, and local governments make it quite clear that whatever we return to will be very different from what we collectively remember as the past. So as it becomes increasingly likely that many of us will be returning to the same physical spaces that we once occupied, it's also becoming very clear that our behavior within those spaces, as well as the makeup of the people populating that space, could be very drastically different. Over the past 5 weeks, we have gone through immense change, and that will certainly not be any different just because we're re-entering society. The immediate impacts of personnel changes and managing the mixture of in-office employees, as well as others who cannot safely, or who just can't because of other reasons, return to work. It does present challenges that need to be addressed in the coming weeks. And actually, we need to be thinking about it right now, making those plans right now. The lagging effects of this event, like a potential recession and long-term travel bans, will continue to kind of test all of us. Since this situation obviously is so unprecedented in our lifetime, the first few HR Fireside chats in this series placed focus on crisis management and how to combat the specific challenges being presented each week. So now that we're kind of in the early stages of knowing potentially what those first steps of reestablishment may look like, it's important to begin thinking more longer term. So as HR practitioners, talent developers, and managers, not only do we need to continue to have that focus on business outcomes and financial responsibilities, we're also responsible for the humanity in those decision-making processes, as well as the execution of those decisions. Businesses that position humanity first consider how they can truly transform in the next phase of this change in 3 areas: why the work gets done, how the work gets done, and what will the organization do to protect their people. Your business deliverables only get done by the people of the organization. So I have an example I'd like to share with you. I have a client of mine, the beginning of this, that beefed up cleaning and sanitation crew in response to COVID, as many of you and other organizations did. And so, as you know, retaining janitorial staff for many organizations is a difficult challenge. What this company discovered is that many of the people in these roles didn't live near their job. Many of them didn't have a car or a driver's license. And most employees relied on public transportation or borrowed transportation, which often didn't operate in the evenings when they worked, or was too dangerous for them to use in off hours. And so to address these employee transportation challenges, the company launched a shuttle bus system in partnership with the local transportation companies. Yes, it cost the company some upfront costs that weren't originally budgeted for. However, because this transformation step was put into place, they've been able to keep consistent and honestly a happier workforce that has been able to take on a role that most don't want to do. Now, I know that I shared a position that's not virtual. However, it does demonstrate how the organization had to think about the care and protection of all of their employees, discover ways to support consistency and efficiency, execute a new initiative fairly quickly, and spent some money upfront to solve a problem that coincidentally actually had been a long-term problem. And they knew that this solution was actually not just going to help right now, but this was going to be a strategic long-term solution that ultimately will change the bottom line. So I invite you to brainstorm with your leadership to consider what areas of your organization need to have that human lens when problem solving. So regardless of what type of business your company is in, the most pressing issue on your leadership's agenda should be the health and safety of your workforce. You may need to make sure that employees have access to that reliable information from reliable sources on a consistent basis, on a repetitive basis. Through detailed metrics and analysis, your organizational leadership teams need to review the company's safety considerations, including if worker injuries or fatalities happen during this time. This information should lead your leadership team to have more visibility on the pandemic's impact on both your full-time and contract employees, and really be thinking about their health and safety in the workplace. If the company offers health insurance, you can review those and make any modifications so that employees can care for themselves and their family. When people who work for you know that humanity is evident and is communicated in the decisions that you make, they will not only treat the employees in your organization with more care, but ultimately they will do the same for your customers and your clients and the execution of your customers' deliverables. You will also need to reconcile the emotional uncertainty of your employees when we do reopen. And you're going to have to reconcile your own emotions and emotional uncertainty as you make these tough decisions and execute these tough decisions. This is a time to get settled in yourself and your core values. Are you ready and able to accomplish the projects and initiatives that are going to be outlined, particularly if much of your organization has shifted to remote work? We see big differences in the preparedness at the individual, team, and organization and national levels, that when resources are at hand, along with the speed and quality of decision-making process, it varies greatly, and the differences will determine who achieves and who falls short of success. During this time, you definitely want to make sure that you strengthen and develop your own POV, but in collaboration with others. Because many of you and your employees and or leadership teams have been working in isolation, you must develop and strengthen your POV with others. You cannot make the necessary decisions in a siloed approach. And I know that seems really obvious to say, and you can't execute these decisions alone, but I will tell you that many of your executives, maybe you, may and will overlook departmental and individual inefficiencies and the lack of cross-functional solutions. So last week, Tiki and I talked about pulling together a change management coalition team. And this is especially engaging your other key stakeholders in getting prepared and ready for return to work, return to the building, and what roles should, could, and might become long-term remote. So here's kind of a golden ticket question to be thinking about as you begin to develop these strategies. How are you keeping your C-suite and senior leadership from making those decisions with a siloed mindset? What powerful questions are you bravely asking to necessarily reroute that mindset? Post-crisis decision-making right now is not the time for command and control. We definitely had to do that at the very beginning because we had a very short period of time to pivot. But the thresholds for decision-making now engages in a way where we have to be able to say, let's put out all the cards on the table for multiple scenarios and multiple solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Also need to be thinking about the positives and the benefits, of course, but also the challenges and the barriers. The positive and the benefits to this could potentially be when you think about some of these roles that have transitioned to remote, they may actually remain remote in some form. Some of the benefits to this, as you think about from a talent access, it can be a much broader talent pool, especially when you're looking for a specific skill set. It really opens up the opportunity not to limit candidate proximity. It allows a little bit more flexibility. So when you can kind of relax what might have been once very tightened, we can't do that job on a remote. It won't work. When you kind of loosen that up, remote work can actually set some employees up for success because they can adapt without any drop of productivity levels. If you can't check employees, a couple of things kind of need to be checked. Is this truly a performance issue? Is it an individual preference or old mindset? Or is the role truly a necessity in the office? And you've got to validate that. And of course, you've got to make that pending depending on if the employee prefers to work at home or inside the work. And then the environmental and work style control. The option to work virtually gives the employee a lot more control over how they work and in what environment. Some teams are significantly more productive when they can work from home than in the office. Being in an office can be very distracting for some, especially since we've got a lot of places that have that open office plan. If a remote employee finds working from home distracting, they have the option of working in a remote or in a coffee shop, very much like this fake coffee shop here, or in a co-working space. The choice can be theirs. And as we have seen in the last month and a half, you can also tangibly see how team members are actually getting work done or not, and it kind of unveils their communication style as well. And one of the last benefits to this can be cost savings. Companies who have more virtual people where it can make sense, they actually have a lot more major cost savings than other organizations. Companies moving to accommodate for remote workplaces will not only reap some benefits of cost savings, but it can also help with overhead and expenses. And of course, you want to think about some of the challenges and barriers. You want to continue to build and pivot on the culture. The culture will be different upon returning. People now know it's possible that work can be done, clients can be served in highly impactful ways, even when virtual. And in that, the culture of connection, communication, and oversight has changed and will remain changed. So how are you prepared and your leadership prepared for that? And then, of course, we know that some of the barriers to this can be miscommunication, but I wanted to say that mindset is the very fabric of success when communicating with each other, with clients, etc. And Tiki will touch on this in a moment, but what protective equipment and care solutions are you going to provide your employees? Because the reality is when they come back to work, it's your responsibility. If they get sick, if something happens, it's your responsibility at this point. But then you also have to define what part is the employee's responsibility as well outside of work. So now that you and your leadership teams are starting to create those change coalition plans and creating plans and starting to validate those plans, it's time to make the decision and move. So using explicit and tacit knowledge to develop and consider multiple options, as well as identify indicators and recognize patterns that will allow you to choose the course of action that will achieve the best outcome. Remember that you will make the right decision and you will do the best that you can do. Understand and encourage your leaders to know that we don't have a crystal ball. Nobody has a crystal ball to tell us of our future. And that we need to not only assure ourselves in this process, but that we also need to communicate consistently, effectively, and repetitively to manage expectations to our customers, to our clients, to our staff, and our key stakeholders. Don't underestimate the use of regular dialogue to impact and increase your social impact and your social capital. This is the trust, knowledge, reciprocity, and shared norms required for social connectedness, and it plays a critical role in making individuals and organizations more resilient. You are a conduit to ensure that your leadership and organization are trusted during this time, the entire event, and years to come. Tiki, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Good. That was so good. I was over here looking at my notes and taking some notes while you were talking. So let's just take a moment and just take in what Allison has shared with us. And that's how we talk about leadership first before we go to the process. So the big thing is honoring your feelings or your thoughts, your reactions, building this coalition and collaborators for change, and then obviously putting a plan in place. And the last couple of sessions, we've talked about the importance of communication. Now that the government or your state or local officials are talking about moving to opening up, you still need to be communicating what's your point of view. You've heard this news. What does it mean for your organization? Don't stop because there are questions out there with your staff. So let me just take a moment here before we start delving into some of the processes. So we talked about the what. Now, how do we get that done? To see if there's any questions. So if anyone wants to take yourself off mute and ask a question, or if anybody want to put a question in the chat, we want to pause because that's what the Fireside Chat is all about. I want to see what you have to say about leadership. What do you need from a leadership moment? Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, so I'm going to be reading off of you. You're going to see me looking down because I've been reading a lot of publications. And so I want to give the facts, just so you know some of the things that I'm reading. The U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission just published some new guidelines around ADA, Rehabilitation Act, and EEO laws as we begin to return to work. I've also taken some notes from some different sources around what you should be considering. So if you kind of see me looking down, that's what I'm looking at. So one of the things in making this motion to move forward, and just like the conditions of going to in crisis mode, one of the first things that you need to do is do some conditioning modeling around why would you reopen? And what are those scenarios? And so some of the things that we've been reading is that you may start out, for example, looking at half remote, half in the office. So you may want to be working with your leadership teams to say, what are the critical positions or the critical roles that we need? Why have we deemed them as critical? And why would they return to work? And then what do those conditions look like in order for people to return to work? Now, if you do that condition modeling, you have to also realize, depending on if you're a local operation or a global operation, your employees may still be in a situation where their cities or their particular city state may not be open. Most city and states that we've heard, schools are not open. There's a hardship for childcare. So some people may say, you know, we're going to bring the executive leadership team back and we're going to do some strategies. We may bring our directors back. And so it may be a combination of saying we're going to have some business meetings. So what are the conditions for reopening? And then start creating those models. I will tell you to look at a time horizon between now and probably June and do small stage gates to say, if we think about the next 2 weeks or 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days, what does that look like? Also, too, the last time we met, we talked about going back and looking at the employee life cycle to say, now that you've been working in this environment, some companies have furloughed, some companies have laid off, some people are all remote. What are the roles that really need to be occupied in the office space? What roles can still be remote? Because we've learned something new in this pandemic about how you operate and how you can deliver. Also, too, I want you to think in your condition modeling, and this is very important. There may be some people who don't show back up. There were some people that were impacted by COVID-19. I was reading yesterday at one school, 7 teachers passed away. And so how do you begin to think about that in reference to, do you know any employees that were impacted? Do you have a tally? What teams? Because that may not be broad knowledge today. Or did you lose any leaders? So you really need to think through the conditions. What do you know and what does that look like? And what's the impact of that? Also, with the conditions of reemployment, reopening, you have to also think about your benefits. If somebody had a life insurance plan, maybe now their families are going to be reaching out to you for that. If someone was sick, does workers' comp, and all these things play a factor. So you need to start really thinking about, because now as you open up in a different way, employees and their families may be reaching out. So that's thing number one. I'm just going to use something to, I'm going to read something. I would say if you reopening, you maybe want to work with your logistics team to say, do we need to do anything about our physical workspace? I do believe social distancing may be in place for a while, which leads into the protocols. Secondly, what protocols will you have in place? The EEOC does put some guidelines out there, and if you don't have it, I'll email it to you, around it, requesting people to take their temperature. Do you have the equipment to do that? Do you have PPE equipment? Do you have masks? Are you separating your desks? What happens if someone gets sick at work? Is it immediately? Are you taking attendance in a different way if you have people in the office? So if you know someone was had a fever, whatever the symptoms are based on the CDC, how many people were in the proximity? There are some things as well as around, if someone was exposed while they were out, the requirement to report to their employer so we know that they did have COVID-19, because they can be subject to having symptoms again. Now, the regulation does say that you need to keep that medical information, because it is medical information, separate from your employee files. And so most companies have an ADA accommodations team or short-term disability team. You may want to commission a small team that can handle this type of sensitive information, because as you return people back to work, Tiki was in office, she started coughing, having these symptoms, what do you do? And so your managers and leaders will want to know, what are the new protocols of the new workplace and what action should they be taking? Because someone not acting quickly, you can potentially become liable, because now you have a workforce. So that's, do they stay or do they go away? Is it really pressing? Also, the EEOC does talk about that it is okay for employers to take temperatures as a way of the new workforce. So making sure that you have the equipment to be able to do some of this. Also, too, if someone now has a disability, they have some new language around ADA and disabilities. If someone was disabled as a part of that, so you may want to look into the regulations and think about, from higher all the way through, what are the new protocols? So you need to work with logistics. Also, too, if you do not have a health safety officer, as you can see, the importance of someone understanding health safety, sanitation, all of that, you may want to look at onboarding someone in a 1099 capacity, or making that as a full part of your leadership or your HR team. You will need someone with some expertise, depending on the work environment that you have, to bring that knowledge to leaders in the workforce once you return people back to work and now they're within the 4 walls of your organization. So that is that. And so this was published, the last update I have was on April the 17th. So if you don't have it, I could send it to you. Just drop me a note in here. But there's a lot of guidelines around medical exams, hiring and onboarding, confidential medical information, what's a reasonable accommodation up under these periods. and then what the employer can and cannot ask as a part of return to work. So that's a very important document. The third topic is modified telework. And so now that we've been working from home, we understand, you work with your leaders, you've looked at the positions, you know all of this. You may make a decision to be in a telework situation for the next 90 days, 120 days. And so while we had crisis telework, you may need to start modifying, what does this mean? So for an example, maybe we put goal setting on hold, or maybe we put projects on hold because we were trying to get to this. We need to start reshaping the organization to get back focused somewhat. And I want to go back to Allison's point about being human and doing that. But at some point, we're beyond the crisis. We may be in our new norm. And how do we get our culture, our expectations, our goals? How do we savage what we have and get people marching in the right direction? And so even if you're in a telework situation, some companies have instituted office hours because they recognize people maybe not be able to meet. Some companies have instituted different forms where people are tracking what they do. Whatever methodology works for you and your company and what you need to do. You may need to look at your modified telework, or you may need to expand the language in your telework policy and put some new conditions. How do you terminate in a telework environment? If someone says, hey, I can't get on, and my kids or this, or whatever the case may be, you need to spend some time with your policy team to take a look at that. Let me see how we're doing on time, because I want to be respectful of time. Okay, we're doing good. And then so you may want to take a look at that. So let me just go through a couple of things, and I'm going to read point blank. Key considerations for opening and expanding operations. Obviously, looking at the state and local directives, so you need to know where you are, what's happening for your industry requirements. Physical workspace modifications, separating desks, workstations, modifying your open floor plans, adding partitions. You may have seen some of that in grocery stores. Closing or modifying common work areas, your coffee stations, some of those types of things. Making new signs in the office. I've seen in places where they have what 6 feet really is. So those may be some of the physical things that you need to do. Limiting in-person interactions and physical contact. If people do come in the office, you may say, even though we're here, we're not doing any meetings in the conference room. We may still do those virtually from our desk until such a time. Limiting the size of in-person gatherings, instructing employees not to use other employees' workspace or equipment. So if you had a hoteling type of situation in your work environment, that may not exist. Do you have things to clean the workstation after every use? Allison mentioned deep cleaning several times throughout the day. Do you have the staff to be able to do that? Looking at ongoing travel restrictions, clients, and then if you do lunch breaks, you may have to, in some cases, if you have customer service, stagger lunches and breaks to not overwhelm your restrooms and some of those types of things. Um, if you have not done any training, you may want to work with your L&D team to put what is really social distancing, what does that mean in the workplace. Make sure that's a mandatory training that everyone attends and that they understand. Also for management, I'm just reading through some of these things that I took notes. Updating schedules, maybe going to Alpha Bravo, maybe Tiki works Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. You have 2 different groups in versus everybody working the same schedule. And then regular screening protocols, maybe it's when they come in, is it midday, is it afternoon? So those are some of the things. Protocols for tracking and opening COVID-19. You should track if you're going to be taking temperatures, keeping that medical information separate. Looking at reinstating your credit cards, your security access if you um, took any of that down. And then if you haven't worked with IT, I'm not sure what you guys' plans are for ensuring recovering for any files or data that may not have been on the server if you're not using a server on your employee's computer. So that's just something out there. Then the final thing is really a comprehensive review of policies. If you have not looked at your policies and how this may shift in the future, some of the policies you may want to look at is your leave policy. If you have not updated with the CARES Act, there was some language that goes into the end of this year around leave, working with your payroll administrator to make sure if anyone goes out on that leave, that you have the appropriate coding to code that time. You may want to look at what your furlough and RIF policy may look like. I know a lot of people have instituted RIFs from a financial perspective. If you guys cannot get your curve back, you may need to do different waves of furloughs or layoffs or some of that, and also reinstatements or recalls. Looking at your benefits. What happened to 401ks? What happened to ability for people to get into those types of plans? So you may want to take a look at that. As well as any premiums of employees. If you do have employees in a furlough situation, what's happening to their premiums or any discretionary benefits that they had. Maybe working with your provider if people had to go off. Is there a re-enrollment period? So there's a lot to consider when we talk about reopening. And then wage and hour. I do know with a couple of clients I've worked with, we did across the board salary reduction. What's your plan to evaluate that, to maybe reinstate salary? What are you going to do for your performance review cycle and your merit cycle and your bonus cycle? So what are those things that's coming up on the time horizon for performance management? So you may want to be taking a look at that. Brushing off your business continuity plan, making sure that you have a recovery plan or portion in that. And then if you don't have a COVID-19 task force within your organization, you don't have to have a COVID-19. As Allison mentioned, you should have a small task force that's looking at what's happening at the federal, state, and local levels where you have offices, looking at it if you do start returning, looking at that medical information and what's the plan to review and set aside, and making sure that you have protocols so people do not panic and they do not get tripped up in the moment, because we are also hearing, and I'm not a medical doctor, while people have recovered, some people, those people have recovered, are starting to see symptoms again. And so it's going to be very important that you step through making this decision to return. And I would say if there's not an immediate, and this is my own professional opinion, to bring people right away, work through that conditioning model and phased in approach to be able to do that. When was the last time you physically inspected your workspace since you've been gone? Did you have a deep cleaning since you've left the office? Do you clean before you come in? Somebody has to coordinate all of that. And as leaders and HR practitioners, we have to be raising these types of questions to the leadership team and not taking anything for granted, because once people come back, and then also finally, what is your death notification policy in case you do have an employee expire at work? Do you have a partner that can transport? I mean, these are very tough situations, but you need to have something in place because it could likely happen based upon what we've seen with the virus and things that have happened, especially with people who don't know they've been exposed or have it in that instant type of situation. So I've covered a lot. I have a ton of resources. If you need them, let me know. Let me pause. I know we have about 5 minutes. Let's open up the floor. Questions, comments, criticisms, concerns. What do you need now in order to move from we have a plan, but we haven't socialized it, or we have a plan, but we're not really confident. So I'm thinking about those top 2 graphs that we had. So let's open up the line. I want to hear from some of you guys.
And while you are deciding to unmute yourself or write in the chat, just know that today's content, not only will you receive a recording of today's session, but an outline of all the things that we've been talking about with links and or additional documents that'll be attached to that email that we will share with you as well. So I'd love to hear comments, suggestions, questions, criticisms, all the things that Tiki mentioned. Would love to hear from you, since we've got about 5 to 10 minutes before we shift off of here.
I think one of the things I mentioned in the chat is that we have to figure out what to do when we have a bigger mix of people who are on site and off site. Because we shifted from, so my company is, a few hundred people across 2 states. We've had everybody in the office for the most part. We had a handful of offsite people. Now we shifted to everybody offsite, which has actually increased the amount of written communication, the recording of information. And I think people have to an extent romanticized it a little bit to say this is how working offsite is. But how do we keep people realistic about the fact that when you do end up, like say 50% of our people go back to the office and 50% work from home, it's not going to be the same as everybody working from home. There are going to be water cooler conversations that are missed. There's that informal communication that happens. How do we do that without coming across as it needs to go back to exactly how it was?
I think that's a very good question. And I would say in general, so one, that's a discussion you need to be talking with leaders to say, this is an aha moment that we've had and let's talk about it. I think the second thing is that it's going to be important in your communication. It says, we went from all in here to all in at home. We do know that there's probably going to be a blend over a certain time horizon. These are the steps that we're going to try to take because we're going to be social distancing and not having water coolers. So we're going to try to still invite people to meetings through Zoom or through a conference call. Be very conscious, and maybe says when you're starting a meeting or if you're having a conversation, who did you leave out? It could be just some of those types of clues. And then you just ask people to be patient because it's not deliberate and intentional. It's just that we're all caught up in the moment. And so I think that should be a part of your first communication. Says, we're having discussions about what does it look like. Here are some top things that we're considering, and here's some risks. And this is what we're going to try to do to address it prior to making these actions. Will it be perfect? No. But if you feel like you're not getting the information or something's changed, we're going to be taking pulse surveys or mini spot surveys to make sure, because it is going to be an adjustment period until we find the harmony and chemistry of what our new future looks like. And it is going to be new and different. So it's a new relationship because the old one is gone. So I think that that's just the transparency of that. So I think it's a very good point, but start socializing that now. Who else?
The thing that I would add too is in the trainings that you'll be doing with your people is that being a part of the repetitive conversation too. And even in that moment of, hey, there's going to be conversations that are going to be happening offside that you're not going to be a part of. So one, employee, it's your responsibility to ask your managers, your team leads, whatever, hey, tell me what's going on in the office, what conversations are being had that I've not been a part of. And then two, to remind your leaders, your team leads, your managers, all of that, like there's going to be water cooler conversations happening. So you need to make sure that all your people are on that, and you'll have to repeat that because it is not a normal behavior for us in the workplace. Even when we're all together, it still happens, and then this is just going to accelerate that. So we do have, so Kaylin has asked or has said, I would be interested in knowing what some of the organizations you've worked with are doing related to remote work and plans for returning to work. And she also says, I think the biggest challenge will be to determine what the right mix should be in office versus remote, and how to do that, and maintain productivity and culture.
Yep. So I'd say for me, some of our clients have decided that they're going to stay. Well, we're going through that scenario-based, that condition-based exercise right now. And most of them decided that they're not making a decision until April the 30th. So I think thing number one is that there's no rush. And then secondly, we're going through an exercise to say, what are the critical roles? And that's based upon customer demand, how we deliver, how do we operate, what did we do as the extension cord during this period? And is it key? We have to get back to some normacy. So that's one client is saying we're going to start with the leadership team, bringing in our executive leaders, then our next level leaders. So they're starting with the top down. So they're not asking employees to come back, but they're still, at home. And so those are the two clients that have started entertaining this. Others are still trying to make a decision if it's even important right now to start thinking about it. So those would be my two thoughts. And then some are still working. I do have a bank client. They have about 10% of their workforce that's essential. So they've still been working. They've had these Alpha Bravo teams. They've had deep cleaning. So they've been working as a part of this, but I'm not sure Allison or anybody else on the line.
Yeah, I mean, that's been essentially the same thing with the clients I've been working. I have one client that has actually more employees that are frontline employees. They're a food commodity business, and they have people working in chicken houses and warehouse spaces, and they've had to make pretty intense accommodations for that. And they've also done the Alpha Bravo, like the shift the work very differently. And they have held their team leads and their managers to a very high standard, I mean, even higher standard than they ever had before. Like they check in every single, their C-suite checks in with their leaders. How are you communicating? When are you communicating? Who are you communicating? And what are you communicating? Because those individuals are exposed more than those of us that have been remote have potential to be more exposed. So it's the repetitiveness is so key. Like don't underestimate, and you're going to irritate people with it. But if they're irritated and they start making fun of you, then you know that they're getting the information.
Okay, cool. So I want to be sensitive to time. I think we're right at time. So put your name and information in the chat. We're more than happy to send any information to you. We can reach out and help you. I'm going to try to get some of this stuff together so Allison can send on the recap. One final poll before we go. We really appreciate you joining. I think we have one more, and then we may re-up with another series of topics. So let's do our final poll, and you guys have a great week, and then we'll see if any other questions. So if support advice was available to you for free in the next 10 days to get prepared and ready, where would you spend your free dollars as it relates to remote work going a certain way? So let's just see. Go back to your phones, 22333. Allison N677. You should probably already have it up. So where would you spend your free dollars if you had it for the next 10 days? People strategy, okay. People strategy, communication, more HR fireside chats. Okay, nice. Okay. Well, let's see, let's lock it. So thank you for that feedback. It's helpful for us to, as we start thinking about the next iteration of how we bring support to our clients. Our next topic is sustaining inclusion, agility, and flexibility, because that's really important. I really appreciate the time. Any feedback, we'll take it. Allison, over to you to close us out.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here today. Within the next 24 to 48 hours, you'll have the content from today as well as resources and notes. And Tiki and I always welcome, like if there are topics that you would like to hear about, we will continue this. We're even thinking about plans of making this more of a long-term type thing. And so we would love to know what would be helpful for you, whether you're an HR role, leadership role, C-suite, whatever that role is. We'd love to know how we can support you both from an HR strategies viewpoint as well as a leadership mindset and presence standpoint as well. So we're here to help you. And thank you so much. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to be with you today. Yep. Take care.
Thanks.
And we'll see you all soon.
Be safe. Cheat the curve. Flatten the curve.